Remember in Advent Children when Cloud started wearing this stupid wolf medallion? Yeah, I hate it. So, I don't know if this is a meteoric take or anything, but Final Fantasy VII Advent Children kind of sucked. In retrospect, Advent Children and the entire FF7 compilation series was when I was starting to get sick of Final Fantasy under the direction of Tetsuya Nomura. I'll even readily admit that I thought Advent Children was cool the first time I saw it, and for many of the reasons a lot of people did. It had cool fight scenes, and it was just pleasing to see Cloud again in some form or another. But over time, Advent Children just started leaving a stinging taste in my mouth. And it wasn't until I revisited FF7 Classic that I realized why. Advent Children's Cloud is not Cloud. Not like in a literal sense, but more so that Advent Children's Cloud is a laughable imitation of the Cloud I experienced with FF7. The implication we're supposed to pick up on is that Cloud is now a wolf. Just a lonely, sad boy who is symbolized by this animal emblem that he was never meant to be associated with. But Square characters of the 2000s just needed to wear some form of trendy jewelry so Nomura could merchandise the fuck out of them. If it were just Advent Children, I'd be willing to just chalk it up to one bad movie and move on. But then there's Kingdom Hearts Cloud and Dissidia Cloud, both of which tried to sell Cloud as some emotionless, broody sad boy, instead of the dynamic, layered, and complicated person he was in 7.
I fell into darkness, and I couldn't find the light. Fighting you would be meaningless. I'm tired of taking part in pointless battles.
Jeez. Stiffer than the stiffs back home.
Nomura obviously had other plans for AC and FF7 compilation as a whole, which started to become readily apparent when literally Gact appears in Crisis Core. It was around this time that you started to see Final Fantasy branded everything. Jewelry, fashion items, cell phone cases, Zippo lighters, cologne? Not everyday fan merch like figurines or posters, but merch that was weirdly angled toward a sort of big salary, trendy, fashionable bourgeoisie.
I will surely impress my executive associates when they see me pay for our extravagant luncheon with my officially branded Final Fantasy VII leather wallet. Truly, I am the one-winged angel of the border.
Nomura started treating Final Fantasy like a lifestyle brand. Like a fashion label, like a product, instead of the treasured game series about intricate worlds and complex characters that made the series famous. Hell, Nomura was trying to push Lightning as a model for Louis Vuitton. The headstone of this, of course, was the multimedia juggernaut catastrophe that was Final Fantasy XV. A title that wanted so badly to be more than a game, complete with a feature film tie-in, anime tie-in, a fragmented story sold as pieces of DLC, and more than one case of product placement, so much so that the actual game suffered for it. If you want to know more about the Final Fantasy XV disaster, Super Eyepatch Wolf has the deets. If Advent Children was the tipping point of Nomura's self-indulgence, then Dissidia, Kingdom Hearts, and the FF7 compilation were the avalanche that followed. FF13 was the avalanche hitting rock bottom, and FF15 was Nomura finding a shovel to dig deeper and somehow send this disaster hurtling into hell. I'll admit that I was never the biggest fan of Final Fantasy, and in retrospect, most of my favorite Final Fantasy games aren't even mainline titles. Final Fantasy VII was the first title in the series I've played, so I'm obviously missing 6 games worth of series history. But I don't think it's too much to ask that I just want Final Fantasy to be good again, put into the hands of people who actually love Final Fantasy and care about telling compelling stories, and not about commodifying the name into a product marketed towards highbrow fashionistas who don't even care about video games. I don't even have to look very hard to find what I'm looking for, because there are better Final Fantasies out there that aren't Final Fantasy. Bravely Default is a better Final Fantasy. Octopath Traveler is a better Final Fantasy. Grand Blue Fantasy, which is manned largely by ex-Final Fantasy staff, is a better Final Fantasy. If anything, The work that Yoshi P does on Final Fantasy XIV is like a love letter to the entire series, showing reverence to Final Fantasy's history, old and new alike. There might be a brighter hope for the series yet, with the upcoming Final Fantasy XVI developed by the 14 staff, with Nomura's name nowhere in sight. I just want to be clear that I'm not saying ew capitalism or that merchandising is evil. I am not above spending hundreds out of my own pocket for an expensive figure or a collector's edition box. What I am saying is that Nomura's unhinged obsession with fashion and expensive lifestyle brands led Final Fantasy away from its roots, and the actual games began to suffer as a result of Nomura attempting to force Final Fantasy to appeal to a completely unrelated demographic. Imagine if Naruto suddenly released an officially licensed cologne for $90 a bottle. I don't have the numbers, but I am fairly sure that a majority of Naruto fans aren't out to purchase $90 cologne. And I'm also fairly sure that the kind of people who do purchase $90 cologne don't care about Naruto. And if you're that weirdo that exists in the middle of the Venn diagram, then I guess a perfect product exists just for you? I understand the notion of supporting the titles and brands that I like by purchasing merchandise, but for as long as I've known it, the people who are fans of Final Fantasy are not the kinds of people purchasing $300 Sephiroth wallets. So when I look back on it, I see Final Fantasy VII Advent Children as the start of what ruined Final Fantasy for me, and the Wolf Medallion is emblematic of Nomura and his commodification of the brand. Corporate demands Cloud to wear some sort of iconic animal motif, so we're going to start saying he's a wolf to represent his new hollow state as a brooding, marketable sad boy. Anything that reminds me of Advent Children just makes me upset. More than anything, I will never forgive Advent Children for making me hate Tifa for like 10 whole years. That's it for today's ABItorial. If anyone else has any thoughts about how a wolf medallion encompasses a decade of commodification that personally ruined the entire Final Fantasy franchise, feel free to leave a comment. Don't forget to give this video a like, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more anime and game content from SugarPunch. Be sure to check out our Patreon for early access to all of our future videos. I'm ABI, and I'm shilly-shallying the hell out of here.